Petroleum Act of 1949, Republic Act Number 387. An act to promote the exploration, development, exploitation, and utilization of the petroleum resources of the Philippines, to encourage the conservation of such petroleum resources, to authorize the Secretary of Agriculture and Natural Resources to create an administration unit and a technical board in the Bureau of Mines to appropriate funds therefor and for other purposes. Under Article 3, State Ownership, all natural deposits or occurrences of petroleum or natural gas in public and/or private lands in the Philippines, whether found in, on or under the surface of dry lands, creeks, rivers, lakes, or other submerged lands within the territorial waters, or on the continental shelves, or its analog in an archipelago, seaward from the shores of the Philippines which are not within the territories of other countries, belong to the state inalienably and imprescriptibly. Granting of petroleum rights. The right to explore for, develop, exploit, or utilize the petroleum resources described in Article 3 thereof may only be granted to duly qualified persons by means of concession in accordance with the provision of this Act. The government, however, reserves the right to undertake such work either by itself or through its instrumentalities, or through competent persons qualified to undertake such work as independent contractor or contractors under a contract of service executed for the government by the President and approved by the Congress in accordance with the provisions of Article 13 of the Act. Exploration or exploitation rights may be exclusive within certain areas, but no exclusive rights may be granted for refining or transportation. The granting of concession under this Act is discretionary with the government, except in cases mentioned in Article 11 hereof, where upon the fulfillment of formalities and requirements of this Act, the granting thereof is obligatory upon the government. Under Article 11, it enumerates the obligatory concession, which are the following: exploitation concession, refining concession and/or pipeline concession, refining concession to the holder of a pipeline concession, or pipeline concession to the holder of a refining concession, which will be further discussed as we go through with our report. Administrative structure. The Secretary of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources is the executive officer charged with carrying out the provision of the Act through the Director of Mines and Geosciences. As executive officer, the Secretary is vested with the authority to prescribe rules and regulations and issue orders which he may find necessary to effectuate the provision and purposes of the Act. The Secretary is also authorized to create such offices as he may be necessary under the Director of Mines and Geosciences, which shall perform the functions enumerated in Article 95 of the Act. Officials and employees of the executive branch of the government connected with the administration and disposition of mineral resources, including petroleum, shall not be allowed directly or indirectly during their incumbency and for 5 years thereafter to apply or acquire concession or to be interested in any application filed or concession acquired under the Act.
Next is the free area and the National Reserve areas. Free areas are all lands within the territorial limits of the Philippines. Next is the National Reserve areas. These are areas which have been included in any exploration or exploitation concession but which had been subsequently given up by the concessioner voluntarily or in accordance with the requirement of the Article 50 and 53 of this Act. Right of the government and as well as the concessioner. First is right of the government to establish reservation on grant rights. Concession granted under this Act to the rights of the government to establish reservation over the other than petroleum reservation, to grant mining rights, permits, leases, and concession in respect to the substance other than petroleum. Next are the rights of the concessioner. First is easement over public land. When easement or right, temporary occupancy or over public land is needed by concessioner for the purpose of carrying out any work essential to his operation under this Act, such right may be granted by the Secretary of Agriculture and Natural Resources with due regard to the prior rights of third parties and subject to applicable laws and regulations. Next is the right to enter private land. Exploration and exploitation concessionaire are granted the right to enter upon private lands covered by their concessions for the purpose of conducting geological and geophysical studies. Next is right to easement over private land. When easement of temporary occupancy over private lands are needed by the concessionaire for the purpose of carrying out any work essentials to his operation under the provision of this Act, he may enter into necessary agreement with the owner or legal occupant of such private land. Next is the use of water, timber, and clay. Concessionaire may utilize for any of the work to which his concession relates timber, water, and clay from any public lands within such concession. Next is the application for concession. Application for concession under this Act shall be filed within the Director of Mines, who examines and pass upon the same as well as upon the qualifications of the applicants. General obligation, work corresponding to concession granted under this Act shall be commenced with reasonable promptness and prosecuted with reasonable diligence in accordance with the oil field practice.
Non-exclusive exploration permit. Any person legally qualified to acquire concession under the provision of the Public Act 387 may upon application acquire a permit for a non-exclusive right to undertake surface geological or geophysical investigations within the free areas. Applications shall be filed with the Director of Mines and Geosciences, who shall examine and shall forward the same with his findings and recommendation to the DNR Secretary for his final action. Applicant shall pay an application fee of 100 pesos. Exploration concession. Application shall be filed with the Director of Mines and Geosciences. A map of the block desired to be explored shall accompany the application for exploration concession. An application fee of 1,000 pesos shall be paid by the applicant. Exploration concessions may be granted on any lands within the free and national reserve areas which are not covered by valid and existing exploration or exploitation concessions, or by petroleum drilling leases, or by petroleum mining claims. Exploitation concession. Application for exploitation concession shall be filed with the Director of Mines in accordance with the provisions of Article 28 RA 387. Application fee for exploitation concession is 2,000 pesos. Refining concession. A refining concession may be granted to any person who discovers and registers with the Bureau of Mines and Geosciences any natural deposit of oil or seep or emanation of gas. Application shall be filed with the Director of Mines and Geosciences in accordance with Article 28 of RA 387.
Pipeline concession may be granted to any person legally qualified under RA number 387. Application for pipeline concession shall be filed with the Director of Mines and Geosciences in accordance to Article 23 of the same Act. Concessionaire requires the non-exclusive right to transport petroleum by means of and through a pipeline system. Construction and operation of pipeline, pumping or compressing stations, storage tanks, power plants, etc. Pipeline concessionaire shall have preferential right to utilize his installations for the transportation of petroleum owned by him. Concessions can be cancelled if there is falsehood or omission in the statements made in the application which may affect substantially the facts. Also, for failure of the concessionaire to begin the construction within 1 year from the issuance of such concessions. Failure of concessionaire to perform work obligations and pay annual tax for 2 consecutive years may cause to cancel exploration and exploitation of concession. For suspending production operations for more than 6 months without prior written approval of the DENR Secretary as provided under Article 62. For failure to deliver or pay to the government its royalty within 1 year from the date such royalty becomes due. Rights acquired by virtue of concession shall be extinguished upon the expiration of its terms or upon cancellation. RA number 387 gives incentives in the form of tax exemptions. It can be presumed that if municipalities, cities, and provinces were authorized to impose business taxes on the manufacturers and retailers, the resulting losses would be passed on to the consumers, which will trigger the increase in oil prices.